It's March 11. Hope you're all experiencing a fantastic day, fantastic week, and we got a great jump start on the year. So it's when we are active and we're doing things that fun stuff happen. So it's really today is coming about because we've been having some real good fun out there. So hopefully, are you seeing? Nope, I forgot to do the screen share. Hold on for just a second. That does it. All right. So here's what we want to talk about. And it's like, wait a minute, how often can you talk about agency, right? Yet I got some very specific situations I want to talk with you about today. So here's the first situation that actually has come up. I'm dealing with real situations. So here's one, and it's a fairly common one. Listing agent shows a complete stranger their own listing. And they ask the listing agent, because they like it, to write the offer up because they do want to buy it. What is the agency relationship that we will be disclosing to the buyer? So here's what I want you to do. Just take and write that down, what your answer would be to this. All right. Here's the next situation. A friend comes to you asking you to handle a closing on a home on which they've worked out all the terms with the seller. All they need you for is to put it on paper and close that transaction. What is your agency relationship to that friend who's brought it to you and to the seller that they put this deal together with? Again, just be brief, make a quick note on your paper, and then we're going to do some stuff, and we'll come back and we'll see if we got the right answers. Situation number 3. You have a pocket listing, and as part of your regular lead generation, what we do on a daily basis, trying to find buyers for our sellers, sellers for our buyers, talking to 5 people a day minimum. Someone you talk to says, I'm looking for a home. They describe it to you, and it matches all the things that you have in this pocket listing. So what is your course of action? What is your agency disclosure going to be to each of those 2 parties? Because no contract existed with either one of them. Situation number 4.
Wait, Darwin. So
and you're
you didn't
gonna
have a
love
contract
this
with the
one.
seller and you didn't have a contract with the
You
buyer?
have a buyer, notice that I put that in quotes, who is out visiting open houses on their own. They're not going out with you. They're out on their own. They visit one particular open house where the agent informs them that they need to sign an agreement before they're permitted to walk through the house. Now, this is not law. This is something that this particular agent, depending upon their circumstances, how they happen to be holding that house open, they're living up to the terms of the settlement. I hope everybody's got that one. And with that, let me bring on Jeff Leach. And Jeff is going to share a little bit of a story about this particular situation. Jeff, if you would, sir, I'll let you kind of explain. And guys, this is more of an awareness thing than it is anything else. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, so one of our agents has a buyer from out of state. Okay, does not have not a client, but a buyer from out of state that she's been kept in contact with, and he's looking for a $2 million house. And his mother lives in Michigan, and she's going to list his mother's house here in Michigan once he buys his new house. And then she's going to move in with him. he went to an open house from a local company in Birmingham that everybody knows. And it was like $2.3 million house. And the listing agent was there and said to him and everybody else coming to the open house that they needed to sign this buyer agency contract in order to walk through the house. So he signed the buyer agency contract and walked through the house and never got a copy of it and did not hear from that agent again. And then a couple of months later, when he was in town again to work with our agent, he got a text message from that agent in Birmingham that said, "Hey, I haven't seen or heard from you in a while. Are you still looking for a house?" And he replied, "Yes, but I have an agent." And the agent responded with, "Yes, I'm your agent." And he said, "No, you're not my agent." He's like, "Yes, you signed a buyer agency contract with me and it expires in a year." And so he's like, "No, no, no." So that agent forwarded him the copy of the buyer agency contract that was for a year. And this buyer said to his attorney, "What do I do?" And his attorney said, "You use that agent to buy a house because you have a contract with them for a year." And also, the agent put on there that should he or anybody in his family sell a house within a year, they would use him to sell the house. And he went back to his attorney, and his attorney said, "Well, it looks like you're selling a house with this man and buying a house with this man."
Ouch. So, guys, why do you think Jeff and I wanted to bring this situation up to you today? What's the message? Well, in this case, because someone just mentioned don't sign anything. Well, here's the key. We didn't sign anything. Our buyer, again, the reason I put it in quotes, our buyer didn't sign anything with us. Then this agent, whom we can only assume is, I'm going to say, really did what they were supposed to do as part of the settlement. I don't think that the buyer, wow, talk about being fully informed. And now here's this. I'd hate to be the agent who's got to work with his buyer, although that when I think about, what, $3 or $4 million in sales, maybe I could suffer quite a lot. I don't know.
So
But
they did buy a house a little over $2 million with this agent, and they did sell mom's house for 899,000.
$3 million in sales. So what do we do? Literally open discussion, guys. What do you think we should do? I got one here. Speak really loud.
Okay, so if you are working with a buyer who has already signed up with you as an agent, you should definitely inform him that whenever you go for a house, which are like open houses, do not sign anything.
So Dinesh just hit it there. One, which you made an assumption, we signed an agreement. So that's really what I want to say first. One, have your buyers sign an agreement
Yes.
with you. That's a big key. Two, it's inform your buyers not to sign anything with any other agent, because that's going to create a whole bunch of other issues that you don't want to have your time wrapped up in, trying to keep them from paying two compensations while still getting ourselves paid. Again, we have to be aware, and I think above all else, Dinesh just nailed it. Sign them up, sign them up, sign them up.
Yes.
Inform, inform, inform. Educate, educate, educate. Karen, would you
Get
add
your
anything to
contract.
that?
I would say, get your contract. Make sure you got your contract. And if they say, hey, it's an open house and da 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 da, and I would like to go and see it, you have your contract in place and say, and I have had this happen. And I say, when you go to the open house, as a courtesy, let them know when you walk through the door, you are already working with an agent. Oftentimes, they may ask you, do you have a signed contract? You can say yes. And they will let you freely walk through the home so that you can view the house. And I said, and if you have any questions while you're there, reach out to me. Make
Now,
yourself available.
the only thing that could throw a wrench in that is if the agent doesn't represent the seller. Thank you.
Hey, Darwin.
Yeah, go ahead, Sally.
Um, I before, August 17th or whatever that magic day was, um, in circumstances like this, a buyer can ask to be released from a contract. I don't care what that attorney said,
Yes.
but they're not in charge of that buyer. And that buyer, it's like it's like a freedom of speech. You don't have to be forced into using somebody. That's not what this law, should have been for.
Well, again, it's not a law, but here's what ended up happening. And Sally, you're right with that was not the intent of the settlement. The intent of the settlement was to make sure that buyers and sellers are fully informed, and that they know who's actually responsible for paying in a transaction. So I want to clarify, Sally's absolutely right. They can ask to be released, but does the broker have to release them?
And doesn't it come to a question of procurement at that point too?
Well, and in this particular case, you might be thinking procuring cause.
Yes.
With this one at that point, we really wouldn't even be looking or dealing with procuring cause because they've signed a contract. They're going to owe this broker money.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Darwin,
go ahead.
also, the buyer said to this agent, I don't want to work with you. I want to work with my agent. And so our agent contacted this agent and said, my buyer wants to work with me. His loyalty is to me, and I will offer you a referral fee. Well,
I'm going to guess he didn't take it.
not on a $2.5 million house, no.
Yeah, but the problem is that it's the buyer's choice. Whether he got roped, I mean, this to me is an ethics violation. And I'm going to be honest, Jeffrey, I think your agent should file an ethics complaint. But it's really bothers me that this poor buyer just got the shaft. And
Yeah.
our business is service-oriented business.
Well,
And
here's what I want to throw out because this is an important part. There may be an ethics violation because we're talking code of ethics. Because ethically, just human ethics, man, that was a bad thing to do to somebody, right? Question is there a violation of the code of ethics? But most importantly, put ourselves on the other side. We need to know that our listing contract and our buyer contract specifically states basically that I'm going to go with basic. The two of us entered into this contract. It takes the two of us to leave the contract. So a buyer can ask, a seller can ask, but a broker does not need to release them. And that was what the attorney was referring to in this particular situation. Okay. I look, it's the law, and I think it's a great situation to know, regardless of which side you're on, Guys, this is a huge learning lesson for us. Okay, huge learning lesson for us. Sir?
Quick question. If the buyer has signed with me as an agent already a contract, and then he walks into the open house and the guy says, sign it, and he signs that.
Yeah, well, so now we have a different issue. So just make sure everybody heard that. The question was, we've done the right thing. We've got our buyers signed. They're under contract. They're visiting open houses, which is a safe and fine thing to be able to do. And they forgot about what we told them. And another agent asked them to sign a contract because the agent didn't fully disclose, and then at the bottom of the disclosure say, by the way, do you have any other contract with any other agent? Okay, this is the type of stuff that we've got. But see, at that point, we've got something to work on. And now I can say that you just committed this buyer to a second compensation. I already had them. You didn't ask, shame on you, release them. We have something to work with at that point. Okay. Now, the only other thing to remember on this is if the listing agent is holding a house open, they're listing an agency disclosure. I'm going to throw them both in, and an agreement as per the settlement. The agreement is not necessary. An agreement where the listing agent is holding their listing open, the agency agreement is not necessary.
So with that said, Darwin, this agent deliberately misled that buyer into believing that the only way that house could be seen at that open house was that he had to sign the agency agreement. And not only did he mislead him to that degree, but he also locked this buyer into any future transactions with regards to the sale or purchase of other homes. I think that an attorney could tear that up all day long, and I do agree with Sally. It's something that could be taken for the.
Well, see, guys, we don't know all of what the conversation was between the attorney and that buyer. We don't know what the conversation or the situation was between that listing agent and that buyer. But here's what we know. There was a piece of paper that was openly and willingly signed. They were not forced, coerced to sign that agreement. By the way, many of us are guilty of this. Many of us are guilty of this. It's just the really, by the way, think about it. And this is where, guys, we could probably discuss this one situation for a very long time. And the part that's catching us right now is the emotion. Logically, we don't know the full circumstances. Therefore, it could be everything was fully above board. We just don't know. So here's where I want you to take it. Take it from an aspect of protecting yourself, protecting your buyers, protecting the public by educating. Because the first thing I thought of when I heard this situation was, man, there should be a whole bunch of us that just goes out and does a PSA and educates all of our people. That's a social media post just waiting to happen. Okay. Karen, I think you got something?
Yes, I want to just share this briefly. I had a situation where a client contacted me from my sign, wanted to view my listing, and doing what due diligence. Are you working with the realtor? Do
Good.
you have a signed contract with the realtor? And the answer was no.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I showed them the home. They decide they want to put an offer in on my listing. I am representing them now to put this offer in on my listing and so forth, because I did the paperwork before I even showed them the home, right? And new contract, right? So did all of that. And then this realtor contacts me and says, you showed a home to my client, and they want to make a purchase, and you signed a contract with them. I would like you to release them from that contract. And I said, Well, I spoke with said client, and they expressed that they did not have a contract with the realtor and was not working with the realtor. Okay, now here comes the rest of the important information. Well, I had been communicating with them for the last couple of years. I have them set up on automatic emails from me, and they just haven't been looking readily and steadily. So but I have been emailing them for the last couple of years. I said, do you have a contract with them? Well, no, I don't, but I've been in communication with them. I said, I said, I do understand. I respect that you reached out to me. I said, I will communicate with the client. I said, at this point, no, I will not release them. I have a signed contract. And bottom line, she didn't do her due diligence. She did not follow up with them. She did not stay in touch with them. They waited too long to find a house, in my opinion, on her behalf. And now that they found one, she wants to come in and just walk into an easy sell. And I talked to the, and then I spoke with the client, and because her first communication was, the client asked me to call you. When I spoke with the client said, no, I did not ask her to call you. I wasn't even aware that she called you.
Wow.
So you got to do your due diligence, answer your questions, and be confident in what you're doing, and know that you are in, when you're doing something correctly, know that you're standing on the grounds you need to stand on.
Yes.
And I would feel bad because maybe a newer realtor might have thought, well, I need to release them. No, I told her, no, I will not release the client.
Yeah. I think that's the most important out of your message. Again, it's a bilateral agreement. By two, it took two parties to enter into that agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Two parties must agree to leave that agreement.
Yes.
There's a thought in real estate that just says a seller can fire us, a buyer can fire us. Matter of fact, we even believe that we can fire buyers and sellers. Got to be a mutual agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Two to enter, two to leave it. Okay.
Yes. But I was so happy that the client still wanted to work with me. And that said a lot about the
Yeah,
lack of communication, right? That you got it.
absolutely.
Yes.
Just remember, it's going to be the paperwork. If you ever bring me anything, where you're going, hey, here's this situation, I'm going to ask for all the paperwork, because what does that say? So I want to move on so that we can answer all of the situations, and let's see. So here's a quick review. I believe that we all need to make sure that we know and understand. We are a designated agency. And a designated agency company is a company where the broker, their named supervisory broker, and the designated agent are representing the seller client or the buyer client. There's no other affiliated licensee relationship or individual who has that. Okay? So only one agent has been designated. Now, in a situation where the other party in a transaction is represented by an affiliated licensee, so we have in our company, Agent A and Agent B, they're in a transaction, then your supervisory broker and either Coldwell Banker Professionals or Century 21 Professionals, they are disclosed consensual dual agents. Automatically happens because of the way our paperwork is set up. How is that set up? I'll show you in a second. The designated agent is the specific affiliated licensee named in an agency agreement to represent a client. You go take a listing, you're designated. You get a buyer to sign the buyer representation contract, you are designated. If the other party in the transaction is represented by an affiliated licensee, the licensee's broker, and otherwise, same thing. That supervisory broker is a disclosed dual agent, just like we described. Now, who is a supervisory broker? It is an associate broker who is named in the agency agreement to provide supervisory assistance. Sterling Heights, that's me. Some of you, I believe Lapeer is an example. Chris Hendricks, okay? You should know who is to be put on that paper because they are to be an associate broker. Now, how do we handle this aspect of the disclosed dual agency for consensual for the supervisory broker? Well, paragraph 44, I believe that's still 44. It's the last paragraph. It does this. We have the buyer and the seller. Therefore, it is solely a transaction of, and I'm using the Coldwell Banker Professional. Disclosure made for the supervisory broker. Many people still didn't understand that that's what that paragraph is all about. We're disclosing that the broker and the supervisory broker is now a named consensual dual agent. So I got Cliff and Dinesh sitting here in front of me. If those two representing one seller, one representing the buyer came together in a transaction, they're still solely representing the buyer or the seller, but as a supervisory broker, I'm representing both. So here's what we know about a dual agent. And the only time, in simplest terms, you can read this is when you, as the designated agent, represent the buyer and the seller. Key, you represent. Let me say that again. You represent both parties to that transaction. And we know that we have paperwork. So there's the agency disclosure, the listing agreement, the buyer representation agreement, and if it becomes dual agency for the agent, a redisclosure. So the listing agreement itself actually has and addresses that if there's a conflict of interest where we do this, here's what happens. Dual agency. The buyer representation does the same thing. It explains that, by the way, if there's a conflict of interest with another buyer, and then the conflict of interest with the seller, otherwise, we will become dual agents in that situation. And here's what we know. The dual agency agreement simply says that we have to have a redisclosure. And this is the document that we would use to be able to do that. It's a redisclosure because our agency relationship had changed. Okay? So let's go back to the beginning. Situation one, listing agent shows a complete stranger their own listing who asks the listing agent to write the offer because they want to buy it. What's the agency relationship? What say you? See, a key here is...
It'd be a selling agent.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, so here's what we're saying. You already represent the seller, and I said a complete stranger. I could have dragged this out a lot more to say you don't have anything with this person, you don't know them. Stay the listing agent and disclose to the buyer that you are the seller's agent. The situation of having both sides of a transaction does not dictate that you become a dual agent, because then you're forcing the buyer to be represented. And is that in the best interest of the seller? There are circumstances that I could describe that you would probably say, you know what, I need to represent this buyer. And if that's the case, do the same thing. Disclose that you're now the buyer's agent, have them sign a contract, and then redisclose to the buyer and the seller that because of the situation on this property, you are now a dual agent. Okay? And by the way, we could take and discuss these a lot more in depth, but always when you run into these unique situations, get with your manager and discuss what would be the best way to handle it. Here's the situation number two. A friend, let's say here, I graduated with them. We've been lifelong buddies. They came to you and asking you to handle the closing on a home that they found. They found this on their own. You didn't know they were even looking. They've worked all of the terms. They got everything. You just got to put it on paper and close it. What is your agency relationship? How do you handle this one?
Transaction coordinator.
Buyer's agent.
Make yourself a buyer's agent. I will do that. Yes.
So I'm glad you guys are throwing it out there. The common thing that everybody does is a transaction coordinator. And I ask the question, why? It has nothing to do with compensation. We're talking agency. So you got a lifelong friend, good friend. You've known them forever. You're not going to represent them? Matter of fact, I'm going to tell you that my experience, and again, it's extremely deep, goes back to 1987. I had a wonderful broker who taught me so many things. Con Ed instructor, pre-licensed training instructor, doing all the things that I've done in my 38 years, I think it is now. I would rarely, if ever, do a transaction coordinator. You know somebody in that relationship. Somebody came to you and probably said, I'm going to pay you if you will do this. Okay? So you have the relationship, they're paying you. You don't know the other individual. And what we're saying is, you remember my little analogy. Let's see if I can do it here. This is you standing on a fence, trying to stay neutral and not fall one side or the other. Can anybody get this thin sheet of paper to stand up and not fall one direction or the other? To me, that's what you're going to do if you try to play transaction coordinator. My book, represent whoever is the likely party that you're representing anyway. It's a whole heck of a lot easier to do it out in the open and to know what your full responsibilities are. I've run into too many problems when people tried to play transaction coordinator in this situation. Now, then you can figure out what the compensation is going to be. Okay, but compensation is different from the agency disclosure. Talk that, work it out with your manager, but that's just some guidance, and I want all of you to use some of that logic. Here's the pocket listing. This one's could be kind of tricky. So you have a pocket listing as part of your regular lead generation of talking to 5 people a day. Someone describes a house they would like to buy, and it meets a description of what you have with your pocket listing. So what is the course of action? How do you actually handle this one? Because you don't have any contract with either party. You probably, in this situation, know both parties. How would you handle it? By the way, there's not one answer.
Well, you can bring them together and become a dual agent, or you can bring the offer, be a buyer's agent, or
Crystal,
the
I think
listing
you're
agent.
right
I mean,
with
there's
that.
multiple
You
options
got it.
there.
We really have to take a look at it. And that's why when this one came to me this week, I'm going, wow. So tell me about the full situation. How did you originally come up with the pocket listing? Well, then how did you come up with this buyer? Well, in this particular situation, there was a relationship with each party. So, Crystal, what you brought up first was probably one of the best circumstances would be to represent both parties. But if I really only knew one and I just happened to have a phone conversation with this buyer one day, or reverse it, the seller on the other hand, maybe I do represent just one or the other. There's no one right answer. So the key becomes, what's the circumstances? What makes logical sense? And then I throw in being human. Because remember, there's the other term that we've called implied agency. All right.
Yeah, but I have a question.
Yes,
So
go ahead, Lydia.
who's paying the commission? Does it not make a big decision for us? Like suppose the seller's only paying 2.5 or
So
2.
Lydia, let me throw a situation out that I think many people are at least familiar with if they've not done this before. That would be, I'm working with a buyer, and in doing my job, I'm staying alert of all the for sale by owners, because for sale by owners are part of the inventory
Right,
and
you
part
have
of
a,
what I
you have
should
a,
be
you
aware
have
of.
a, you have a contract with the buyer that says
Yep.
that they'll pay the
Yep.
3%. Right,
Yep.
got
Hang
that.
with me. Hang with me. I'm giving you that situation. So you've got this contract with the buyer, and we all know what our contract says. You owe me 3%, you owe me 4%, whatever it says. They owe that to you. But here's what we've done. We've gone to the for sale by owner, and we said, would you mind if I show it? And then we said, will you pay compensation? And then we had them sign a one-party compensation agreement that had them agreeing to pay it in advance. That in advance, they're agreeing to pay compensation.
Got it.
But we represented only the buyer. We did not represent the seller.
Okay,
Make sense?
yeah,
Yeah,
all
and
the
now,
time.
by the way, keeping it simple, with the way that we have things now since August 17th and the full input of the settlement, it's already on the purchase agreement. It just becomes part of the negotiations of the purchase agreement. So you could go get it in advance, but it's not really necessary, because you've got to have that buyer representation contract anyway.
But just to add on a pocket listing, Darwin,
Yes.
because we've sold many pocket listings, my son and I. If you do want to advertise it on the MLS, you will have to have some type of contract and permission from the seller.
Yes, absolutely. Because then you actually have a listing.
Right.
So yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Any other questions that we got? Any other thoughts that you guys would have?
I just want to add, Darwin, that thank you for all of your insight always. I think that we are the most educated brokerage out there. And I wanted to give this example that this weekend we accepted a contract on one of our listings from a very seasoned agent from a brokerage who you would think would be very educated. And the date and time on her buyer's agency agreement was when she wrote the contract. So she didn't have it before she showed my property, and she didn't have it when she showed him 5 houses over in Rochester the day before. So, just FYI, I think you have really empowered all of us to be the strongest buyer's agents out there.
Well, thank you, Sally. I've always said that our company is always the most informed, most educated, and best agents out there to handle all of this. And you've heard me say this before, is that we need to go out and educate all of the other agents, because they don't know what they don't know. Well, let me throw one other one. Holly, I see your comment here and you just put it in. I thought when we were hosting an open house for a listing agent. So this is what I want you to handle between you and your managing broker. But one of the best ways, because again, per the settlement, a listing agent representing the seller doesn't need to have a buyer sign an agreement to show or allow through an open house, right? So what Holly is addressing is that how do we handle it when I've got a listing and my friend Cliff here is going to hold my listing open? I'm the only one that was designated, and what we've said the easiest way that it might occur is for me to just also have Cliff designated to represent my seller. However, with what we started with situation number 4, what we might have had was an agent where they didn't do that. And so another agent within the company was holding the house open, not designated to represent the seller. Therefore, to live up to the terms of the settlement, anyone who walked through that door would have to sign an agreement to come through that door. Wow. somebody actually did it. And you have to think that somebody with that kind of money would be aware. But here again, it was why it was such a great example and eye opener for us to start with. So hopefully that answers that question. Matter of fact, might even brought a little bit more wrap to situation number 4. So guys, I'm going to officially end it. If anybody wants to hang out, you got additional questions, I got a little time. We'll hang out. We'll answer anything that you may have, but we'll bring another wrap to Hot Topic Tuesday on one that I thought nobody's going to want to come because we're still talking agency stuff. So I'm glad you all came out. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Darwin, I had a quick question.
It's all
If
yours,
you are,
boss.
if you're going to an open house, like, and you have a contract with your buyer, and
Am
they're
I
not
with them?
allowed to
Because you
look at the
said
house.
am I with the buyer?
So no, we're not with the buyer, right?
Okay.
But they have a contract with us.
Yep.
Okay. Is that agent who needs to have the contract not able to let them go through without a contract?
I'm
Can they
going to
show
say
them our contract?
no. Because here's what it says, that any agent must have an agreement signed prior to touring homes with a buyer. So my interpretation from that very specific verbiage says whoever's showing them, they must have an agreement with. So therefore, that would be a circumstance where it's like, I'm sorry, you'll have to actually have your agent here if we're going 100% to the settlement terms.
Wow.
Yeah. But again, because here's this paperwork and what it says and what the settlement says. Yeah. Oh, it literally, it did change a few things as to how we have to think about and guide our buyers out there.
So holding open houses to fish, kind of like to fish for buyers now, is definitely much more difficult because everyone's not going to be willing to sign a contract to walk through a door.
Well, and that's why I always say I gave you the verbiage
Mm-hmm.
that it's not what we are requiring them to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm strictly placing it on the DOJ and these attorneys who thought that they were doing the right thing by buyers.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, this is not what I've put in place. This is what they require of us as part of this settlement. So again, you don't want to use law, but as part of this settlement that we were a part of. It's how they're forcing you, the consumer, to work with us as realtors.
Wow. So if you hold a house open now and you basically become a sub-agent to the listing agent.
Well, you can't use the term sub-agent.
Okay.
Sub-agent is someone in another firm
Okay, gotcha.
who would be appointed to represent your seller. So that's where in a designated agency company, which we are, we would have to designate that agent to also represent that seller.
Yes, yes.
In which case, they can allow everybody to come in because they're there on behalf of the seller.
Can you do that just for the time frame of the open house?
Yeah, you can make it for whatever time, but as I've said, when do your fiduciary duties to a seller end? So when we
They
understand
don't.
exactly, when we understand our fiduciary responsibilities, who remembers the acronym to remember your duties? Old car. Obedience, loyalty, disclosure, accountability, reasonable care. Did I get to see confidentiality? Old car. When do those really end?
It doesn't.
Yeah. So you could specify a time frame, but you might actually be opening up because now you're thinking that, well, I no longer represent them. And then you find a buyer for that house whom you represent. Really, you're still a dual agent. It's not going to change much because, you know, Sally and I have talked about this, and what do you do? I mean, I think Sally, we had an hour-long conversation on this one. Sally doesn't share anything with me, her agent who held open her listing. She's not telling me what the seller would take, where they're going, why they're selling. I don't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is the wonderful thing that the DOJ and these attorneys did for us. So I don't know anything, but what
Now
might
you
be the
gotta be a
easiest
dual
way
agent.
for you to do it?
Yeah.
Interesting
Yes.
stuff, huh?
Very.
Hey,
What else you guys got for me?
Darwin, Mike from my office has a question for you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm wondering about, I'm starting to see it more and more with, properties that are listed by owner on Zillow.
Yep.
All right, so if I'm gonna show my client who I have a contract with, and I show him this Zillow property. Now, we always ask our people that come in if they're working with an agent, but conversely, should I ask potential seller, are you working with an agent? If I don't see the house on the multi-list, any of that, and he's listed as a for sale by owner on a third-party site like Zillow, for sale by owner, now do I need to ask him? Because I'm kind of looking at it the other way, like, listen,
Yeah.
and I'll give it conversely is I had a situation where my neighbor, I talked to him for probably 4 years every day, walking my dog by his house. And we talked real estate all the time. 4 years, I'm gonna sell the house, I'm gonna sell the house. So I thought, yeah, it was getting ripe, or he was about ready to. I could see, and we talked every day. And then all of a sudden, I said, well, Jerry, you ready to list that house? And he goes, it's such a hot market. And he goes, I put it on Zillow by owner, and an agent came in and gave me an offer. Said, I don't need, another agent. They'd handle the whole thing. So it felt like, maybe I had some skin in the game, even though I didn't have a contract with them.
Yeah.
I mean, if this agent would ask that question, I might have been able to have been part of that transaction and represented him, or even had a chance to explain it to him that you want representation, but.
Well, remember this on the agency disclosure. When you go, because we must disclose to the for sale by owner that we're there on behalf of the buyer, that we represent the buyer. We check that off, and just above their signature is, do you have any contract signed with any other agent anywhere in the state of Michigan? Now, that's not verbatim, but that's what it's asking.
Yes.
That's where you're going to find out whether or not they do have a contract signed with an agent. Now, most of the time, if it's a for sale by owner,
yeah,
they have a limited services agreement, of which many of them simply, it's in the MLS, but they paid that broker 5 chickens to put it into the MLS. And that's the only service that they owe that seller.
Well,
and then they say deal directly with the seller. So if you do the agency disclosure correctly, you're going to find out whether or not they have a contract signed, unless if they lie or they didn't listen to you when you asked.
I just think it's prudent because that form should be presented to any by owner that's not on the MLS, because I haven't seen too many of those, used to be the help themselves and all that, where they just put them on there for a fee.
Well, remember this.
What I'm seeing now, though, is Zillow people, and Zillow's getting more and more popular with this, where they're listing them by owner.
Yep.
But shouldn't I go in there and say, listen, if I have the buyer under contract, should I approach that owner and say, are you working with another agent? And
well, no, you don't want to ask that.
Well,
let me rephrase that.
Or don't.
What's the first thing that we are responsible to do prior to the exchange of any confidential information?
Oh, disclosure.
So follow that form. There's my question. Are you working with any other agents? And
if that agent in this situation said that as a rule to that seller, he probably would have told him that he was working with me, even though we didn't have a contract. It could at least came up. I just think there should be some kind of, maybe a rule of thumb, really, that did you contact the FSBO person? Are they working with another agent? Something.
Well, but no, Steve, that's what I'm giving you, or Mike, I'm sorry. when you do the agency disclosure,
Mhm.
that's what you ask.
With the seller of the FSBO,
Correct.
okay?
Because I have to disclose. Now, I know when we actually do it, but by law, it says we must disclose prior to the exchange of any confidential information. Now, when are you going to begin gaining confidential information from a for sale by owner?
No, you're not.
Hi, my name's Darwin. I see you got your home for sale.
There you go.
I don't know when they're going to start spewing any confidential information. So there's what the law says, and then there's the reality of doing business. And it's hard to go, listen, before I talk to you any further, the state of Michigan requires that you sign a form knowing that I represent this buyer. Oh, by the way, you don't have anybody else you signed a contract with, do you? I'm going to send that over. I'll give you a call back once I receive it. That's not the way that we do business. So that's why I say there's the law and there's the reality. But when they start spewing any confidential information, as a minimum, we need to verbally let them know that I'm calling on behalf of this buyer whom I represent. I've now disclosed at least verbally, and then I can get into the aspect of, I'm just curious, would you mind if I were to sell them the home? Well, great. When can I stop by to see it? There's a couple of documents that I have to give to you before we actually show it to the buyer.
So with that being said, if I bring an offer to, if I have good clients under contract,
Mhm.
I find a FSBO that's on Zillow, and I approach that seller and say, listen, I have clients under contract. We're going to give you X amount of dollars. If you, on this offer, are you willing to pay a commission of 3%? Now,
Well, here,
so
what you're
would I
going to do
disclose
is have all
anything
of that
more than
worked
that?
out prior to.
Pardon me?
You're going to have, because really here's how simple it is, Mike. With a for sale by owner, I call them and I want to know very simply, would you mind if I sell your home? Well, no, well, you don't want to pay any compensation. No problem. My buyer's going to make sure that I get paid. Now I go disclose, and I could do this if I'm meeting them today at 5, the buyer, I could meet with the seller at 4:45, have them sign an agency disclosure. 5 o'clock, the buyers arrive. Buyers go, I love it. Let's buy it. We go back to the office. I put it all on paper. Buyers sign it. Purchase agreement says, seller to pay me 3% of the purchase price. I go back to the seller. I say, listen, buyers love your house. Great news is they're making an offer. If you can find your way clear to accepting this, here's how much you're going to walk away with. How's that look to you? Fantastic. Here's when you'd have all your money. Great. So we hit those high parts on here, and I'll go, and by the way, they're doing a 20% conventional loan, so you have very little risk. They've even given me a $10,000 earnest money deposit. All that work for you? It sure does. Let me go through the details. You'll see here that they're asking you to pay 3% toward the buyer broker fee, and that's all it's ever going to cost you. Down here is it is. Do you have any other questions? Sign
Give
here.
me the transaction fee too?
Well, did you represent them? If you didn't represent seller, we can't charge the
All
$395.
right, I'm joking.
Yeah, I know,
All right,
I know.
that's all right.
But that is actually a good question. But yeah, if we didn't have the seller signing saying that they would pay something,
Yeah, I know.
Can't charge it.
No, I know.
you got it.
It's just
But
a
the
matter of,
buyer would be,
The
yep.
buyer would pay.
well, yeah, that's a hard sell. And like you said, in reality, it's
Yeah.
hard to get a buyer to agree. Why do they need you if they're, you know, I mean, if it's a buy owner, they're going to start, those questions pop up.
Oh, no, nope.
But this
You
way,
gotta
if I
keep
get
it
the
really
seller to
simple.
put it on, I like your way of doing it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the way I've done it.
That's what I think. Keep
Yeah.
it really simple. Don't
Right.
make a big deal out of the compensation.
Yeah,
Because if the seller said, I don't want to pay any compensation,
right.
okay, no problem. Then here's what the seller or the buyer would offer you, and it's 3% less. Do you want that? And then the buyer could pay it themselves. Only problem is the buyer doesn't have enough money to pay it themselves that way. So you can either have this or you could have this. Either way, it's the same amount of money, but one won't happen. Quit being
Right.
stupid, seller. By the way, that's just me going through the obvious, right?
What happened to the golden rule where commissions were never supposed to be on a purchase agreement? But I mean, maybe I'm dating myself here.
You know what, Steve or Mike, and I keep looking because Steve's name was on here.
Yeah.
Mike, it's another great question. So there was a misunderstanding to that. What it said is that we could not negotiate the amount of compensation offered from the listing broker.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, now there is none, and it's not, here's the key. This is not our offer. This is the buyer's offer. And the buyers knows they owe us 3%. So they're going, I don't want to pull that out of my pocket, or I don't have enough to pull that out of my pocket. Let me build it into the transaction and ask the seller to pay it. So it's really the buyer who's putting it on their purchase agreement. We're not forcing that, because that's the reason we have those options. That the buyer could pay it, the listing broker could pay it, or the buyer could pay it directly themselves.
I don't know. To me, it just seems it's become much, much more complicated than the old way. But I understand it too. I mean,
Yeah.
it's opened
No,
up.
hey, Mike, you're right. But this is what the DOJ did for us.
Yeah.
Isn't that wonderful that they took care of us and the buyers and sellers too?
Wow.
And yet, I won't say that we're doing the same thing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks,
Anybody
Darryl.
else got anything else? No? Everybody's good? There was. Don got the old car. Thanks, Don. All right, guys. Well, thanks for hanging out. There's still 30 of you on here. There was 48 signed on earlier. Frankly, I thought nobody's going to want to listen to talking about agency again, but these were 3, 4 really great situations that hopefully everybody learned from. So we'll talk to you guys soon. Have a great week. And we'll run from there.
Thanks, Darwin.
You're welcome, Jeff. Thanks for participating, man.